Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Clancy for anyone who's watching who hasn't seen one of these ones before. Um, I am the perfumer, scent artist, creator, and founder of Sonic Alchemy Perfumes, or Sonic Alchemy Scent Art is sort of the name I've been going with recently. And I've had 2 weeks off from doing these videos to have a little bit of a break. I went away for a little while, which was really fun considering how lockdown has been and everything. So I hope you are all well, and thank you so much again for coming and watching one of my videos. Um, Today is episode number 6 of Sonic Alchemy's Scent Talks, 6 of 10 talks about my work and my process and about contemporary projects that I'm working on. And it's also an opportunity to provide you guys with the chance to ask me questions, to comment on my work and that kind of thing, and to sort of make up for that face-to-face contact that we lack now with all social distancing. So, today I'm going to talk to you about my perfume Especial, or as I like to say because I can't speak Portuguese, Especial. Um, it's the first perfume that Sonic Alchemy ever published. It's the first perfume that I ever created under Sonic Alchemy. And it's the first fully considered, fully blossomed composition that I've ever put together as a perfume artist. So it's a significant one. It's also surprisingly 4.5 years later, one of my best sellers and one of my most popular ones amongst people of very different backgrounds and ages. Especial is very interesting because it's the only perfume where I've had a 16-year-old girl and a 75-year-old woman wear the perfume at the same time and equally like it, which is very rare in any kind of creative enterprise, I think. And on top of that, I seem to find that people from different countries in the Middle East tend to really like this. A lot of Middle Eastern men really like Especial as well, which is thrilling to me because I think it is one of the most sort of, I guess, classically feminine perfumes I've ever made. Although, as a lot of you will already know, I don't really like to think about perfume in sort of, I guess, gender stereotype binary ideas. I think you don't publish books to only be read by men and women, or if you, in maybe rare cases, but even then, I think that's not really a valid criticism or valid way of really taking on art to sort of make it a polar thing like that. But anyway, today, like I always do in these videos, I am starting off with a little reading. I have just started a new book, which I'm very excited about. Today's reading is going to come from this book here, which is a printout of a PDF of a book called Perfumery Practices and Principles. It's by Robert R. Calkin and J. Stephen Jelinek, I think that's his last name. Written by two perfumers, one of which who is sort of more on the educational side of perfume training, the other on the more essential oils and aroma chemicals side. So I'm just going to read this little part about, it's about to do with systematic thinking and to do with chemistry in perfume and art. So this is just a little segment. A key question is, should the perfumer have studied chemistry? Some perfumers reply is a firm and unequivocal no. This reaction is found primarily among those who concern themselves largely or exclusively with alcoholic perfumery, i.e. the creation of compositions for perfumes, colognes, etc. A prominent exponent of this wing, Edmund Rodnitska, said, "Perfumers are chemists no more than is the painter who manipulates chemical colors. In itself, composing a perfume has nothing to do with chemistry. The composer must not let himself be influenced by systematic thoughts, only by considering each odor by itself and in its rapport with the other odors, without any preconceived idea, will he make the best use of it. We consider Rudnitska's view to be largely true. The perfumer who thinks too systematically might well be blind, or at least underrate the vast differences among the plethora of smells that the perfumer must encounter. I found that little segment very interesting, for a whole sort of slew of reasons. So interesting that I immediately took notes about it and put them on my whiteboard. I have a little whiteboard up here on my the wall of my room where I just put up things that I need to try and remember, that I find important to me and that I consider essential to remember. And I find that idea of why sort of the trap and the restrictive the restrictive danger really of thinking too systematically, particularly on particularly when we talk about parts of perfumery that have to do with chemistry and chemical constituents. I think there are thought patterns that do not serve creative creative play and creative endeavor, and one is to get bogged down in this sort of thoughts of, well, you know, phenyl ethyl alcohol is this percentage of this rose oil, and so I will use rose oxide, and I'll have geraniol because that's what a rose should smell like, and I'll think in this way that is too complementary, too systematic, like 1 + 1 = 2. When in reality, the beauty and the magic of perfume is creating something that has a little bit of a 1 + 1 = 3. It's about creating something that is not only equal to the sum of its parts, but that feels like it is more than the sum of its parts. That's the real. That's where the great perfumes get made, I think. So something to think about for sure. It's made me really consider a bit more about using ingredients that might make sense together and having them be free like that. It's very interesting to think about. So my smell and tell today. So I have, for people who are new, smell and tell is a part where I bring in a ingredient that I'm using in my perfumes or that I find interesting. I show it and I talk about it and I have a little smell. So today is a very unique one. It is Seaweed Absolute. This is just a little bottle of it here. Now, seaweed, as you can imagine, is not a massive ingredient in perfume. It's not used all that widely, unless you're trying to create some kind of, I think, well, what comes to mind immediately is sushi. But I find it very interesting, and I'm using it at the moment. This Seaweed Absolute is actually from France, from the northern shores of France, I think, sort of kind of nearing the English Channel, and it is a very interesting smell, partly because the Seaweed Absolute comes as almost a solid, like a little bit like a sort of like what would happen if you were to cool down like taffy or caramel. It's kind of sticky and very hard to use and hard to work with. So to use it as an ingredient, we have to apply heat to it, like with a bain-marie, and then we have to dilute it down with a solvent of some kind. And so this particular little sample of the Seaweed Absolute is actually at 2.5%. So it's nearly 100 times weaker than smelling the real pure material. So I've got a little bit on my strip here, and it is although you guys mightn't be able to see it from this distance, it is a beautiful sort of briny green, light green color with some almost verging on the black as well. And I'll have a little smell. What's so interesting about this is that it goes really, really well with different uh, mossy, sort of dark, aquatic scents. And I'm using it at the moment in a new perfume called Azra that sort of works on that idea of mangrove and green sort of sea plants and that kind of idea. What's quite interesting about this as well is it is very reminiscent of fish food. And for anyone who's watching who has any experience with keeping fish as a child, um, that really distinctive smell of the flaky fish food when you would feed them, it has a strange kind of nostalgic element to it as well. Like that's what was brought to mind when I started to work with this seaweed material. There are lots of different kinds of seaweed materials as well that you can get in perfume, but I find this one has that green element in it, where a lot of the other ones tend to only have a kind of dark, really bitter, um, tannic element to it, which is very different from this because this is much more evocative of sort of the green notes that you can find in ocean air. I've always found that certain notes blowing off the ocean, where the wind carries the scent of the ocean off the surface of the surf, you get a real green note in it as well. Um, Green, both referring to the color green and the olfactory group known as green, where you get grassy, leafy, and certain kinds of spices go into that, like green pepper and that kind of thing. Yeah, it's very interesting. So that's our smell and tell for today, and I'm hoping that will bear fruit in my future composition. And so, as I mentioned earlier, today I'm going to talk a little bit about Especial. And first things first, I'm going to just talk about the piece of music that the perfume is based on. So, Especial is the first time that I ever took a piece of music and tried to turn it into a um, fully blossoming perfume composition. And I made it when I was over in Bangkok in 2016, studying with Perfumers World, and we had a kind of what at the time felt like an impossible challenge where we had 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks to develop an entire product range. Um, I think I made the perfume, which is now a special, and a cream and a solid state perfume, which is sort of like a cream, but um, it's far more viscous. It's a solid essentially, and so I found this song called Especial, which shares the name of the perfume by an artist named Sango. And I'm going to play a little bit of the song before I start talking about it so that it makes sense to contrast the two together. Again, I will put all of the links in the comments of this video so that you can find them there. So I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of that, and then we'll go into the perfume itself, I think. I'll just reload to get the URL. Yeah, that's good. think I'll leave it there. If you're interested, I'd recommend going and clicking on that YouTube link that I've put in there and listening to it and maybe coming back or having a good listening to it after I finish sort of talking about the perfume. So in creating Especial, it it sort of was a long process of mind mapping, and every perfume that I make almost has an element of mind mapping or sort of brain drain, where you just have a piece of A4 paper and you have what's called the branches of the idea, where you put in different concepts that you're working around, and then you'll sort of put in little twigs where it's like describing other parts of the perfume. I actually, if you can see behind me up here, no, on my other shoulder, up here, although it's not very clear, I have my mind map for my current perfume up behind me, where I'll even look. I have 4 different sections, and then branching off on those different ideas, I'll go into different depths and using different emotional words and descriptors to fletch out that idea from nothing, which is a cool idea. I try and not overthink it too much when I'm doing the mind maps, partly because I'm trying to retain a sense of spontaneity and freedom. And although they have been essential to some of my compositions, I'm trying to move to a place where I can confidently work on things without them as well. Just to be able to do both, I think is important to me, sort of 5 years in to all of this magic. And so what I did, and some of this will make sense on a second listening to that song in full length, is I took the 4 key elements of the song and created what I call a musical formula, where I had taken, in this case, I had taken 2 different vocals. So the main vocal, which is in the center, sort of at the chorus of the song, which is this sort of young female vocal, essentially. Underneath it, there's this other vocal section, which is I think I just labeled it as like a more mature backing vocal, essentially, that you hear right from the start. It's that really colourful part of the intro, and then there is this sort of vocal percussion-y part that's a guy making sort of a beatbox sound, and then underneath that, then you have the drums, and if you listen with headphones as well, you'll hear that later on in that song, there's quite a lot of bass, quite a lot of sub frequencies that's happening as well. So those were sort of the key elements. Those 4 parts: the 2 vocal, the beatbox part, and then the drums themselves. So I took that and then sort of manipulated it to fit the structure of the of how a perfume might work as a actual design, essentially. So as I mentioned in some of my other videos, perfumes that I have 4 sections as well. So I tend to work in 4s structurally. I think a lot of people misunderstand perfume potentially being this thing that is a kind of process of throwing things into one bottle, maybe? I am not quite sure. Something along those lines. It couldn't be any different. It's much more about building these separate parts so that they're structurally and aesthetically beautiful and right, and then bringing them together to the final composition. It's sort of like if you were to record vocals and play guitar and then maybe have some percussion in a song, you wouldn't necessarily play everything together and then try and record over that at the same time. You get lots of what's called bleed. Anyhow, I started with that heart note idea, which is this young woman's vocal part, and to do that, I used a lot of different floral ideas that actually ended up shaping the way I used florals for maybe a year after that. It was surprisingly influential in that sense. So I use this specific kind of rose petal note, which is a um, kind of a very full young rose idea that doesn't have any of the spicy elements of a lot of the complex rose absolutes like Rose Bulgaria, Rose Anatolia. Those sorts of ones have a real spice in there. They have this real intense kind of truth about them as a result of that. Um, so I mix that with this beautiful Jasmine Absolute, which is in a number of my compositions. Fiat Lux, Dorsia, Arbor, quite a few of them have this idea in it, mixed with this really cheeky little raspberry note, which I tend to combine with a lot of these rosy ideas to kind of smooth things out, and also to give that sense of youth. That if you check back on the song, it sounds like it's almost a young girl singing in the middle of the song, and so to get that element of her voice, I used ingredients and materials that were um, very evocative of youth and kind of cheeky exuberance, maybe youthful femininity. Um, so with that, I have quite surprisingly a banana note as well. This sort of interesting banana note that I diluted down, and then it started to come together for me, blending these materials, these floral and fruity ideas, which is a very conventional, um, which is a very conventional sort of, I guess, theme, having the fruity floral idea it come through. It's quite a widely used idea, but I found that um, the more I worked through it, it sort of, I think I described Especial in its product description a bit as being a wolf in sheep's clothing in that sense. It's a surprising twist on quite an incredibly in a way overdone style of Perfume, and plus you have this music and sound and scent connection to sort of deepen that as well. From there, I also used a material that I love and that I've used in Blue and Monolithic called Champaca flower, which is sort of like a tropical, really intensely sweet flower that has that real kind of uh, brightness and sweetness that I think was very important to the perfume as well. It's it's interesting to talk about Especial as well because I think it was through this perfume that I really understood how synesthetic I am and how even listening back to that song that this perfume is based on, it is so interesting because I've listened to that song 1,000 times, literally, and I still get the same impression of its color. And I know I've alluded to a bit about synesthesia before. It's a really cool topic. A lot of artists have it. It's actually more common than people think. Um, but to me, Especial as a song and as a perfume, part of it being that when the song hits me, I get an impression of a number of different colors and sort of shades and hues, and Especial tends to have that element of hundreds of intricate little variations on the relationship between yellow and orange as emotional things, as emotional colors, and so as a result, you get this idea of sun and warmth and summer, and that the long days that seem to never end, and that beauty of the everlasting sunset kind of idea. Um, yeah, so you get these. you use beautiful impressions of colors with music in my own work. It's the exact same with Winston's. It's the same with a lot of them. For me, even the ones that don't have anything to do with music, like the Rothko series, it's that same idea where I could go, here's this chunk of black in this painting. I'm going to use these pepper notes with these wood notes. And it's just this by feel, sort of moving through it as a kind of, like you would a maze kind of. It's not necessarily logical why you would move left over right when you enter into the maze, but you do, um, and eventually you get out, hopefully, or you get to the center, which is a lot more accurate to how I work, getting to the center of these things. So yeah, I'll leave synesthesia there for the moment, I think, but then you have this idea of the perfume. So that's how I kind of crafted that heart note, and I pushed sort of, I kind of manipulated the quantities a bit, but I am, I think, as at least in retrospect, more concentrated on and more focused on um, what what qualities of what ingredients, what things I'm actually working on, and the materials themselves, than really the proportions. I think you can get into a bit of a loop, and a trap by thinking that, well, if you have materials that you don't necessarily think are working well, you can jostle the quantities of them and the proportions and get something miraculous. I think it's almost like, it's more to do with the colours themselves and the quantities of the colours, I think is a good way to put it, for sure. So from there, I moved on to this sort of masculine percussive element, which, sort of a beatboxy element, and I combined that sort of as a mixture of nutmeg oil with frankincense. So you just have these two elements that have this kind of dry, citrusy, rough, quality. This kind of synesthetically brown kind of, yeah, this element of tension as well. That kind of, its texture has that element of rawness, which fits really well with that percussive part. And then I think I mixed that with a couple of other jasmine notes as well. So you end up with that connection between the top, what's the heart note, and this new note, the top note. Part of it as well is I tend to build in um, complementary notes for the rest of the perfume that can shade and manipulate and hide parts of the heart note till later on when you're smelling it, like kind of plotting out how the perfume will develop. And this new note, this percussive beatbox note with nutmeg, frankincense, tends to do that. It contrasts sharply with the heart note and gives this element of movement as well. And then if you'll remember, I mentioned that there's two female vocal parts, and there's sort of more of a mature, like neo soul vocal part that's happening from the beginning. That really, even now, listening to that song, sounds so incredibly orange, like a light, sort of the color of a frangipani orange, really. And so for that, I use, funnily enough, orange flower, which has that beautiful dark, really intense, um, orange scent, um, with with a frangipani note, and then another jasmine note to kind of, um, to build in a sense of maturity to the scent as well. I think might be a good way of explaining it, to make it not too, to give it a sense of grounding as well. It was really important. Um, I think the most sort of interesting in certain ways part of Especial is um, is the bass note, and the bass note represents the kick drum, that low sort of thud with the bass as well, which you'll need to listen to the song with headphones to really get. Um, because I've mixed and sort of contrasted these ideas of um, um, vanilla with some musk elements. Again, very traditional, but then I've added in this smoky Spanish cade wood, which really does smell like a bushfire. I used it in my Art Not Apart installation bushfire perfume 2 years ago because it has this amazing smoke sort of charcoal element to it. It's very, very intense. It's really the smell of burning wood. And anyone who's ever been near a bushfire, when they smell an ingredient like this, it perks them up. It's a serious attention piece. And I sort of diluted that smoky wood note down, sort of gentle enough and soft enough that it tends to shape and darken and the whole perfume, kind of giving it um, this sense of darkness, this sense of something else happening outside of the confines of a floral, fruity perfume. It gives it a sense of otherness, of otherworldliness, and which is quite interesting because cane wood as an ingredient is more traditionally, as far as I can tell, used in sort of really traditional masculine leathery perfumes, maybe verging on the woody side of that. So it's sort of interesting to blend these things that aren't hugely used together um, in a perfume like this. So that is sort of the basic idea behind it. I've sort of given a good run through, I think. Um, I'm going to, just before we finish up, link uh, the online description where you can find a Especial on my Etsy online shop. So I'll put that in the comments now for if you'd like to sort of read a bit about the actual scent itself, which I'd obviously really recommend. Um, and just before I finish up, I'd also like to say that I am having a workshop at my home in 2 weeks. It is happening on, I'm going to just check the date right now really quickly. I think it's happening on the 18th. Yeah, so not the coming weekend, the one after. I will also put that in the description, in the comments. There's only 4 or 5 tickets to that. It's going to be really fun because, as I sort of announced in my last video, this week was my 3rd year as a sort of doing this publicly, and I thought it would be good to put something on to celebrate for that. So I'm going to leave it there, and I wanted to say thank you so much for watching, and I will be back next week with episode 7, and I will see you guys then. Alright, have a good week everyone. See ya, bye.